You're now listening to the Peach Pundit Podcast, where we are expressing our own personal opinions. These views may not reflect the opinions of those whom we may be professionally affiliated.
Welcome back to the Peach Pundit Podcast. I'm Jason Pye, joined as always by Scott and Buzz. Scott is apparently learning how to use a computer.
I clicked the button and it started 3 times. I don't know what happened.
Sure. We are still working through our technical difficulties with Riverside.fm. We're always open to new platforms, so please, by all means, if you know of a better platform to record podcasts, let us know. So a lot of stuff happening in the last really even 24 hours. I mean, this week has been absolutely chaotic between polls that have come out in Georgia, which we'll get to just in a moment, as well as things that are happening in Washington, D.C. The legislative agenda this week was absolutely insane. I think they're still voting. Last votes were supposed to be at 3:00 today. I think they're still going. But we'll kick it off with our polls. There's been a lot of polls that have come out in just like the last day or two, and both in the governor's race. Yeah, it's like polling week.
Shark Week.
Governor's race.
Week.
Governor's. I think this is Shark Week. Governor's race, Senate race, Secretary of State's race. So we'll start with the top of the ticket. I didn't see that one, but we'll start at the top of the ticket with Kemp versus Abrams, and you had let's see, like the last 4 polls released this week, all showing Kemp ahead, but the degree to which they're showing Kemp ahead is kind of revolves, but. Regardless, he has a lead. The question is whether it's in the margin of error. 2 of those polls say yes. 2 of those polls say no. So we'll start with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution poll that came out earlier in the week. It showed Kemp up 5, 48-43 over Abrams. Then we've got Survey USA, WXIA, show Kemp up 1. That's within the margin of error. The AJC poll was outside of the margin of error. Fox News shows Kemp up 3, which is just within the margin of error. He's up 47-44. And then Fox 5 Insider Advantage, Kemp up 5, 49-44. So guys, it's looking, and Abrams has been up on the air. Nobody can say she's not spending money. She is. She's up on the air. So it's looking like she's not making much.
And the AJC's openly cheerleading for her.
Yeah. So it looks like she's not making much of it.
The AJC is openly cheerleading.
She is not making much of a dent in her polling or her numbers. She really doesn't seem to be able to get up above 44%. The last 3 polls all show her at 44%. So what do you guys? What's your way too early take on where the state of the governor's race right now? We'll start with Buzz.
Buzz is muted and also doesn't know how to use a computer. So I'm going to jump in and say that
I was about to cough,
I think
so
these trends
are. Sorry.
You want to go now?
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say I think some of these polls continue to, it's way early. We're still 115 days out, I think, or something like that. So it's still way early, but. I think that the trend, especially in the fundraising gaps that we've seen, that the money is not equal to the leads, right? Even with the Warnock poll that has him up by 9, you would think with the fundraising edge that Warnock has had over Herschel Walker that lead would be in double digits, and it's not. And that's sort of the outlier because Warnock's RCP, Real Clear Politics, polling average, it has him at 4.6. Which means that it is within striking distance for Herschel against Warnock. I still think the Insider Advantage is not exactly a trustworthy polling organization. I don't know that they've done anything to clean up how they treated the primary and how far off they were. So I'd be willing to throw that one out, even though they have Kemp up fairly big. But the Kemp average for these polls in the RCP polls of polls, the average is still over 4. So I think that we're seeing the interesting thing here is, and the AJC has pointed out as well, is the ticket splitting phenomenon is real, that people are willing to vote for a Republican at the top of the ticket, and then for U.S. Senate, at least consider Raphael Warnock for reelect.
Yeah. And Buzz, let's go ahead and get your thoughts since your mic wasn't working.
Sorry, I was about to cough, so I muted myself, but then I forgot to unmute myself.
I do the same thing, especially still recovering from COVID.
So I was glancing at the Real Clear Politics average and going back to January. There were polls that showed Kemp with a 3, 5, and 7 point lead, and here we are in August, end of July, with polls showing Kemp with a 3, 5, and 7 point lead. So I think that's interesting because, as you pointed out, Jason, Abrams has been spending money. She's running a lot of ads. There's been a lot of news, and it's at some point you start to wonder, is the cake baking to the point where something dramatic is going to have to happen to change the trajectory. Now, obviously, I was at a reception for Brian Kemp the other night. The American Legislative Exchange Council was in town. There was a little reception there for the governor, and he's not letting up. He's not trusting these polls. He's not thinking, I've got it easy. He's, as you would expect, and I'm sure Abrams is too, they're working very hard. But so Kemp's not resting on his laurels. So I'm sure they're working hard to consider any eventuality that might come. But I don't know. It's the state of the race has stayed about the same for a while now. That Kemp has a lead at or above the margin of error in almost every single poll, and doesn't seem to be any trajectory change in that.
So Scott, you mentioned, and Buzz, I think you're right. Scott, you mentioned the Senate race and Warnock's currently having a polling average lead 4.6% or 4.6 points. A couple of things I want to note, because we all sort of downplayed that Quinnipiac poll. You had to take 5 points off of it. But you got this Survey USA poll. And look, Warnock leads. Warnock has had every poll that has come out since the beginning of June. There was the Eastern Carolina University poll that came out at the beginning of June, had them tied. So I think you have to go back to the beginning of April to find where Walker actually had a lead over Warnock. Yeah. So and so in every subsequent poll, they've been
to the point about the tickets.
Yeah, so you have to go back that far to find a lead for Herschel, and they've been tied, or Warnock's been ahead ever since. You can't. Quinnipiac, generally speaking, is a pretty respected pollster, and I'm looking at over here. I have this computer screen. I have two other computer screens over here. So I'm looking at 538, which rates pollsters and provides election analysis for those of you who haven't been initiated into 538 and Nate Silver. He grades pollsters. Quinnipiac has an A- grade out of the 219 polls that have been analyzed, but Survey USA is the fifth highest rated pollster according to 538, and out of 834 polls that have been analyzed. Now, look, it's not to say they're getting one wrong here, or they're not getting this wrong, but a couple things I'll note about this Survey USA poll. 604 likely voters. So we're not talking about registered voters. We're talking about likely voters. And the only poll out of the most recent, since early June, that has been registered voters was the Fox News poll. That was 901 registered voters. So everything else has been likely voters, and you're showing Warnock with a 9-point lead. I think that's pretty significant. But Insider Advantage shows him up 3. Fox News has him up 4. That's outside the margin of error. Obviously, the 9-point margin of error, or the 9-point lead Warnock has in Survey USA. That's a 5.3% margin of error. Got him right at the margin of error in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution poll. The Walker campaign is in trouble, and we'll talk more about this momentarily. But they're in trouble, and they're not really doing much to stop the bleeding. And look, I'm no fan of single party control of government, but I think divided government is the way to go. But they're going to take the House. Republicans will take the House, but the Senate's very much a question mark. But you cannot take the Senate and lose Georgia.
Yeah.
Yeah. The 5.3, I'm glad you mentioned the margin of error for the Survey USA. It is the highest margin of error, but with the highest gap, right? But even then, if you were to give 100% of the margin of error to Herschel, he's still trailing. It's way outside the margin of error in the Survey USA poll. So I agree with you. I think that there are reasons to be concerned.
Well, hold on.
Within the Warnock, within that race.
You agree with me? I'm writing this down. What is today? What is today? Today is
it happens from time
Friday,
to time.
July 29th.
Don't act like
2022 at 3.
Don't act like this is
3:47 p.m. Scott Turner agreed with Jason Pye. This is the best day of my life.
Don't act like it's the first time, Jason.
Moving on to the Secretary of State poll. Moving on to the Atlanta Journal. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution's poll in the Secretary of State race. Brad Raffensperger has a 14-point lead over B. Wynn, which is significant. That, folks, in case you're wondering, is outside the margin of error.
Mm-hmm.
It's that's
a hefty
significant
number of undecideds.
With a hefty number of undecideds.
In that particular
15%,
Yeah. I mean, he's not. Raffensperger's not over the 50%, magic 50% threshold, but and 7% are going to vote for Ted Metz, the Libertarian Party nominee. But that is...
Hang on, time out. If Ted Metz gets more than 5%, I'll buy Ted Metz a steak dinner at the restaurant of his choice.
Careful.
There's no way. Sorry, he's not at 7%. He's not getting 5%. If he gets more than 5%. He'll get 5%, 0.00001. I will. He can pick the steakhouse, and I'll buy him dinner.
All right.
I will say this. I have interacted with Ted Metz, and let's just say I'm not impressed. But no. So
he is a very nice man.
Raffensperger, had already pulled off a tremendous comeback, winning the primary. Winning this race will just be the icing on the cake, because I mean, like I said before, all this thought he was a dead man walking.
I think he.
Yeah.
I remember when the primary first started, I thought Raffensperger's the better general election candidate, and I think you're seeing it because he's his own man. He stood up to the president of his own party and said, "No, you're wrong," and No disrespect to B. Wynn. I served with her. She's a smart person. When has she ever stood up to the leadership of her own party and said, "I disagree with you"? I'm not aware of such a case. So I think Raffensperger, you can absolutely make that case that I will continue to run elections fairly and treat both parties with respect, and I have no problem standing up to anybody who tries to undermine that. And that's a strong general election message.
Yeah. And Scott, go ahead.
So Stacey Abrams is on the stump this week talking about how Raffensperger has a lead against B. Wynn. Obviously, she has endorsed B. Wynn. B. Wynn was her successor when she left the House and represented the same House district as Stacey Abrams. And during the runoff, Stacey Abrams came out for her saying, "This is who we need," much to the detriment of D. Dawkins Hagler, who was also in the runoff against B. Wynn for the Democratic nomination. And on the stump, Stacey Abrams was telling people, look, just because you did your job the right way doesn't mean you're a hero. I'm paraphrasing loosely. Just because Brad Raffensperger did what he was supposed to do doesn't mean that he's anything special. We still need B. Wynn, is what she's saying. I don't know that message is really going to play, because in this day and age, when people are looking for leaders who they can trust to do the job the way it's supposed to be, Brad Raffensperger is a proven quantity, right? He has shown that regardless of the pressure, he's going to follow the law. B. Wynn can't make that same claim. She hasn't been in that hot water. She hasn't felt that pressure. She hasn't been in those instances where the president of the United States of her own party is calling her saying, find me the votes. Brad Raffensperger has, and it has been public. It is well known what Brad Raffensperger has gone through, and so he does appeal to voters on both sides of the aisle as a result. The only thing that surprises me is how many undecideds there are, and that's only because it's so far down the ballot that people are really more focused on the U.S. Senate race and the gubernatorial race. But that's the only thing that's surprising to me is that it's in the 15 range. I would think lower double digits, 10% would be undecided in that race at this point, because Raffensperger has shown what he's made of.
Let me tell you why Scott's probably going to have to pay to have to buy Ted Metz a steak. The MAGA factor. There's still a lot of I think there's enough MAGA voters, enough of the Alabama cheerleader types who are still incredibly angry at Brad Raffensperger, and they'll gravitate toward Ted Metz. So you might need to pay up. You might have to. So
Ted, you have a chance, is what Buzz is saying. You have a chance
to get
at more than 5%.
A chance to get more than 5%. I'm not saying a chance to win. I'm not. Let's not inflate things here, but yes. A chance to get a steak dinner.
So you're saying there's a chance.
A chance to get a steak dinner from Scott Turner. So.
Yeah, I will be happy to buy that steak dinner if that's the case. But I just don't think – look, I understand what you're saying. I think that's why I said 5 instead of 3%, right? Because most of the time when a libertarian runs for a statewide race, they get under 5%, unless it's for Public Service Commission, which is for some reason the race where people vote libertarian in Georgia. But in Secretary of State's race here, I think the MAGA is worth 2 points, and I think Ted's probably at 3 in reality, so I think he can get close to 5, but I don't think he crosses that 5 threshold. I just don't.
And Libertarian Party candidates have a tendency to poll high, especially in early polls, but then they start declining.
It could be a repository.
Speaking of
a repository for undecided voters too, right? I'm not sure like that person or that person. Let me go with that person.
Right.
So, speaking of our last poll that has come out as another Atlanta Journal-Constitution poll. This is in the lieutenant governor's race. This is Burt Jones versus Charlie Bailey. Burt Jones polls at 41%. Charlie Bailey is at 36% to 5%, 5 percentage points separating them. Ryan Graham, who's a listener to this podcast, a good friend in the Libertarian Party nominee, he is polling at 7%. We got 16% undecided. That being a very close race, and obviously Jones has, I think, given his MAGA tendencies, I think maybe viewed skeptically by some voters he might need, but that kind of remains to be seen, especially given the stuff that. Oh, look, he had a recent win in court. Fani Willis cannot question him, although another investigator can. So that was, and look, that was profoundly stupid of her. The investigation of this. Yeah, an investigation of this magnitude, and you're gonna go and a target of your investigation, go and hold a fundraiser for his political opponent. Like, come on, like that makes me question your competence. But.
I'd like to add that Tamara Halloran wrote a piece where she talked to various quote-unquote legal experts that all said that Burt Jones would likely lose his motion to disqualify because there is no connection. And then when the judge came out in very strong words condemning Fani Willis for engaging in political activities on behalf of the opponent of Burt Jones, she wrote a follow-up article saying, this is a surprise. And it was like, why is that a surprise to anybody? Any judge who is going to be fair and non-biased is going to see the inherent conflict of interest here. There's no way you can allow Fani Willis to investigate. And this goes, look, and district attorneys have First Amendment rights. They can engage in the political process. They can support with their time and their money
Yep.
whoever they want
Right.
to run for office in whatever race. But when you start to engage in behaviors or in activities to investigate a political opponent of somebody you've invested money in, the conflict of interest is clear to anybody on its face. And the fact that the AJC would publish a piece that says, "Oh, this is surprising," and try to spin it somehow as this was the least surprising thing to happen in this political campaign season to me. It's like, oh, this is obvious. This is what's absolutely going to happen, and they're writing it up like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, CNN. When I was, because I don't watch Fox News or Newsmax or MSNBC. I typically get my news from CNN, which on the bias scale is still not great, but not as bad as the others. They had some commentators on who were like, we don't know what was she thinking? This was like, you don't want to have any perception that you're biased in one way or the other.
Yeah.
And you know, and she screwed that up. But but I think that connection to the January 6th, even though he wasn't there on January 6th, but the electoral college play, all that stuff may eventually come back to hurt him, but we'll see. I mean, Charlie Bailey's not a known quantity. This is a guy who was initially running for attorney general before he switched races to lieutenant governor. And I'm not, I'm skeptical, especially given the state of, you may pull him down some, but is it going to pull him down enough to lose? I'm skeptical. But we'll see.
The Insider Advantage Fox 5 poll has Jones up 43-37, Ryan Graham at 4%, 16% undecided. So you're kind of seeing that similar margin, right? Outside Jones is outside the margin of error, but doesn't have this thing nailed down yet.
He's going to have to work hard.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, he is, and I don't know. It's going to be fun to watch. But switching topics, going to good friend Herschel Walker, who, as we have already noted, trailing in the polls and not running the best of campaigns, did participate in a roundtable with law enforcement along with Newt Gingrich, also border experts, firefighters, and other first responders were discussing crime, and that according to Mallory Blunt, who the tweet came from, who works for Herschel Walker, the crime that has happened on Reverend Warnock's watch. One thing I would like to point out, crime rates, the most recent UCR, Unified Crime Reporting report that came out from the FBI that showed the spike in crime happened in 2020, which is Warnock was not elected until January 2021. So that actually happened under Donald Trump's watch, if we want to be technical about it. But it happened for very specific reasons. I think that there are reasons, and we could dive into some of those here. But Scott, you put the agenda together, so tell me why this is here.
Well, it's here mainly because Newt joining Herschel at the same event, right? I think that there is an effort to try to bring the policy chops up to snuff for Herschel. And when you bring in a heavy hitter on policy like Newt Gingrich to be seen in public with Herschel Walker, I think that's a sign that Newt is engaged, right? So Newt was here anyway. He was here for Alec. He did several book signing appearances. He was here in Cherokee County at Woodstock at a local bookstore signing books. But he went out of his way to join Herschel at a couple of different events, one at a press conference and another for this roundtable discussion with these first responders. So the highlight for me is that Newt has engaged with Herschel in an attempt to bring him up and get him up to speed. There are few people who can break down an issue and coach somebody through like Newt, right? And Newt knows all the populist buttons to press when messaging. When Newt ran his most recent presidential campaign, wherever he went, he found a local issue that appealed to them. He was talking about moon bases in Florida. He was talking about gas prices in Georgia. Wherever he went, he had some populist message that he was highlighting. And I think that could benefit Herschel in a lot of ways if he's able to absorb the lessons that Newt has to offer. And I think it's a sign that the campaign is doing everything they can to make sure that Herschel is improving on his ability to address policy specific issues.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I also think that one other factor in the AJC poll was that the way they framed it was gun violence is a topic that's on a lot of people's minds. So if you're on the left, that means certain things. If you're on the right, that means standing with law enforcement and that sort of thing, which is what that event was about, was drawing attention to that, drawing attention that we need, from Herschel's standpoint, need to support law enforcement and need to do things to combat crime. So it's kind of I think a twofer, as Scott. I think Scott's right, trying to build up his policy chops, but also an issue that's on a lot of voters' minds.
His policy chops obviously need work. Newt Gingrich was definitely a policy mind when he was in Congress, and he does have a good way of finding specific issues to sort of hone in on. But Gingrich has also seemingly lost his mind in the last few years. He's
the Virginia Newt Gingrich.
The Virginia Newt Gingrich. He's engaged in some weird stuff, and I don't know. He's not who he was 30 years ago or 25 years ago. But that said, I mean, it's Walker needs something, but in terms of I just don't the rampant crime, that sort of thing bothers me, because I've had to endure this because of Trump's speech this past week, where he was talking about Americans are scared to walk down the streets. It's like, all right, well, when you look at crime rate, and I realize if you're explaining you're losing, but if you look at crime rates, the violent crime rate is the exact same violent crime rate that we had in 2014. Now this is national in 2014, so it's half of what it was, give or take, compared to peak crime rates in 1991. So let's if you want to talk about the roots of crime, obviously there are the socioeconomic roots of crime, right? Lack of education, lack of economic opportunity. For some people it's generational. I mean, they're kind of stuck in it and they can't get out. But but treating it as a political football in this way really irks me, because there are so many other things. Obviously, a pandemic, led to a lot of anxiety, mental health issues, because we were all locked in, our houses for, I'll give you a second, Scott. Locked in our houses. The political atmosphere is also breeding. I haven't seen I haven't seen any study on this, but I would love for someone, to some sort of sociology, person or sociologist to write about the political atmosphere and how it has played into potentially crime and sort of especially violent crime. Because I think there's a connection there. Is it a big connection? I can't say, but I think there's a connection there to some degree, in addition to all these other factors. Because our politics, the last few years have basically, let's all treat each other like crap, and not treat each other as humans, because we're treating politics as the new religion, and we're labeling each other by whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. I just don't like the messaging here, the rampant crime. That's it. That I'm sorry for the tangent, but
so there are a couple of points to follow up with what you were saying there, Jason. And the one is that here in Georgia, we're not using the national database to judge what the crime rates are, but in the city of Atlanta, the murder rate has increased year over year. We can do more real-time data at a local level. So I think they have a point about the murder rate increasing here and specifically in the Atlanta metro region, that's a real phenomenon, and it can be pointed to. I don't have the source of that at my fingertips, but if somebody calls me on it, I can easily find it. I have read recently about how there are more murders at this time this year than there were last year. So that could be what they're pointing to. So their complaint about calling out the issue is valid. However, blaming it on Warnock is what's problematic to me. Warnock's a U.S. senator. He's part of the legislative branch. He's one of 100 votes in that branch up there in D.C. It's almost as if he's taking a shot at the Kemp administration, or maybe even the mayor's office in Atlanta. That would be the more accurate target for that particular complaint, because it's not – Warnock can't really do much about the murder rate, right? Unless they passed a bill that was very specific to the city of Atlanta. And so I think that when they use those words of under Warnock's watch, and I'm a conservative. As Jason has pointed out on this podcast, I'm a member of the red team. So, but I find it problematic on the whole to use footage like that, because I also recognize it's not really Warnock's fault. There's a lot of things you can blame Warnock for. No, I don't know that this is one of them.
So one thing I'll point out is, in addition to pulling out the national crime statistics, I also pulled Georgia from the UCR. Georgia's violent crime rate in 2020 was 400.1 instances per 100,000 inhabitants. That is only slightly above the 397.6 in 2016. So we're talking about not much of a difference, but it's still below. I don't go back to 1991 here. I go back to 2000, but the violent crime rate in 2000 was 504.7. So we're still talking 100 less instances per 100,000 inhabitants in 20 years. I want to be I've gotten to I think, and this is like me being jaded by party politics, more than anything else, is I realize the desperate quest for political power and the political messaging and all that stuff, and that you're just going to hammer away on the issue of the day, be it bathroom bills or culture wars or crime or inflation's a big deal. I'm not trying to downplay that one, but let's not pretend that we're people are being ravaged on the streets here. And look, and the murder rate has gone up in Georgia. On the whole, it's up. It's above where it was in 2000, but violent crime taken together is down. And nationally indexed crimes, what's measured by the FBI, is down. That includes nonviolent crimes as well.
You make good points. You both make good points. I think, we have to remember, in politics, perception is reality. And people perceive that, and it's mostly, I think, driven by the murder rate increasing. People perceive that crime is rampant, and every loss of life is tragic. So that's drawing a lot of attention, and the perception is that crime has risen, and something has to be done about it. But I think, Jason, you raise a good point. Yeah, the political rhetoric has ramped up. The political, I think that's driving that. I also think, and this is just me speaking, anecdotally too. Something's happened to a lot of people coming out of COVID. I think the lockdowns, the inability to the frustration of the economy, or the inability to interact with people. It's different now, and we are seeing. We have seen in recent weeks these horrific mass shootings that have taken place. We've talked about those, and it feels different. And so I do think there's something to what you say, Jason, that there is something going on that, and I think it's feeding into that perception that we're headed in a bad place. It probably tied into the overall. This is probably a factor in the overall. I think 3/4 of Americans think the country's headed in the wrong direction. So I think a lot of that, is feeding into that. And yeah, it does frustrate me. I share your frustration, Scott and Jason, that politicians look for these, I guess we used to call them silver bullet solutions. We probably should call it something different, but look for these easy things to do and people to blame when it's much, much more complex than that.
So I found the piece that I read about the murder rate, the homicide rate for Atlanta. It was from July 15th, and it was 11 Alive did a piece. It said Atlanta homicide rates up for the third consecutive year. Crime data shows it jumped 60% from 2019 to 20, slightly in 21, but this year the city's murder rate is outpacing last year's numbers. So I mean,
is that raw data, or is that
it's total? Yeah, it's raw data. It's the total number of homicides.
So just one thing real quick, and I'll shut up about this. But I think George Cheedy has a very interesting Substack that's trying to figure out, why is the murder rate in Atlanta risen? Why are we having more murders year over year? It's called the Atlanta Objective. I highly commend it to you. It's not free, but you can get. He does send some out free frequently. So, worth your time.
Yeah, and I don't know. It's in terms of I would like to see. I think taking murder numbers, raw data, and I'm not saying that the murder rate wouldn't have gone up. I'm not saying that. I'm just very cautious when I hear numbers about murders because statistical.
Yeah, and this is Atlanta is still growing. There are more people in this region now than there used to be, and yeah, you're right that it has to that factors into as well.
And I do want to move on here in a second, but I want to just repeat something that Scott said. I think Scott, you're right that's talking about rampant crime on Warnock's watch is more than anything else. That's a shot at local government, state and local government. It's essentially saying they're not doing enough.
Right.
And so I think that's a really, really important point. Also, I would want to point in, look, I don't have numbers here in front of me, and this is something I would need to look at. But I did see a story recently, in fact, that showed it's not just because I know Republicans like to talk about crime in urban areas that are controlled by Democrats, but crime has been, or violent crime in particular, has been up everywhere. And there's no, it's including rural areas. So that's something to think about as well. It's not. This is a unique phenomenon that's happening around the country, whether you're in a big city or in a small town in the middle of, Cairo, Georgia, or something like that. So, but moving along, because we're still on the Herschel Walker discussions, he wants to have he has agreed to debate Warnock for the fans. What he said for the fans, but he wants to. Which irks me because they're called voters. And he's been hanging out too much with Newt Gingrich because he's asking for Warnock for a Lincoln Douglas discussion on the reconciliation bill. Every time I hear Newt Gingrich talks, he wants to have a Lincoln Douglas style debate, and it's just like, dude. Stop hanging out with the retread.
Those Lincoln Douglas debates lasted for 3 or 4 hours, right? So Newt would love to talk for 3 or 4 hours at a time.
But for the fans,
it's longer than the Joe Rogan podcast.
But for the fans. Also called voters.
Look, Herschel, in Herschel's campaign, if you're listening, you're going to have to do more than one topic. And a Lincoln Douglas style. You're going to have to bite the bullet. You're going to have to go stand in front of the Atlanta Press Club, and you're going to have to look into the television cameras, and you're going to have to articulate policy positions on a number of issues. And if you can't do that, you shouldn't have gotten in the race. And
also,
place.
I mean, look, I think one thing we've seen about Herschel's campaign, the last thing that his campaign staff would want is Herschel rambling on for hours at a time. That's the last thing that Herschel needs. Put the man in areas where he can succeed, and that is not it.
Right. Well, it remains to be seen that he could handle the traditional modern style of debate, and where the topics are picked at random by the media, and you don't really know before you show up what questions you're going to be asked. And that,
and he'll undoubtedly be asked questions about his personal life.
Well, I don't know if the press would do that, but I bet Warnock would ask him some of those questions, and I think that would be thin ice for Warnock to step on because he's got some skeletons of his own. So good luck with that.
So, since we're on the topic of Lincoln-style debates about the reconciliation bill, we want to go ahead and jump in and talk about the reconciliation bill.
Yeah, because Manchin up there, and this is where I put this on the agenda because this is where your chance to shine, Jason. Tell us what's happening up there. How does it impact this year?
It's actually really interesting because for those of you who are interested, I have a newsletter that I write every week that Congress is in session. I should say every week that Congress is in session. It's called Point of Order. You can find it at dueprocess.substack.com, and I talk about all the happenings in Congress. And I've already written my newsletter for next week, except for a couple sections that I got to fill in. But it's really interesting. So they passed this bill, the innovation bill, the CHIPS bill. Actually, what they've been calling it's the CHIPS Plus Act, which deals with semiconductors and other technologies. It's big investments in that to gain a foothold over China. Well, McConnell had said that he would not advance that bill if Democrats went back to their reconciliation bill, we originally called the Build Back Better Act. So with the bill passed, the CHIPS bill passed like Wednesday, I think. I think it was Wednesday. And then the House passed it yesterday. And within hours, it was like 2 hours, maybe 3 hours, Manchin and Schumer rolled out this agreement, this framework agreement on reconciliation, officially no longer called the Build Back Better Act, friends. No. It is called the Inflation Reduction Act, which is Manchin's big thing because he wants to reduce inflation. Now, I'm going to get there in a second, but I want you tell me where you can find the bullshit in this.
It seems pretty evident.
Yeah. So hold on, we'll get there. So they're raising. They say total revenue raised $739 billion. Almost half of that comes from the 15% corporate minimum tax, the minimum taxes that corporations have to pay. Presumably that's C corps. So prescription drug pricing reform, which is a big chunk, that is basically allowing Medicare to negotiate with pharmaceutical companies, and then IRS tax enforcement, $124. You will necessarily be hounded by the IRS for money. I owed for last year, and I pay my taxes. I owed for last year. I don't know how I owed for last year. And then the carried interest loophole, that's $14 billion. So that's your revenue. So they're doing total investments, $433 billion. That is $370 billion, give or take, for energy security and climate change. So that's basically climate change provisions. And then the 2-year extension of the enhanced subsidies under the Affordable Care Act. So according to Senate Democrats, this will save, total deficit reduction is a little bit more than $300 billion over 10 years. So let's do some math. That means $30 billion in some change each year for 10 years. That is a load of crap. And I'll tell you why it's a load of crap. Because they're about to pass a bill. And look, my dad was a veteran. I know that there are veterans who listen to this podcast. I am not saying veterans shouldn't be taken care of. It's the Veterans PFAS bill. It's called the Honoring Our Pact Act, which would basically enhance healthcare benefits for veterans who have been exposed to toxic chemicals like PFAS. The forever chemicals is what they're called. And that would have included my dad who was exposed to Agent Orange in Vietnam. So totally worthy bill. But that by itself has a price tag of $250 billion over 10 years. And that's all new spending. So you're wiping out the savings almost right there. That doesn't include any emergency spending that'll come, because they're already talking about emergency spending right now for the wildfires out west. So they're going to pass a supplemental emergency appropriations for that. It doesn't include any other natural disasters that they're going to do emergency appropriations for. So any savings that would come from this are going to be wiped out, and then some. Manchin's, and so the thinking is they're going to try to put it on the floor this week. There's a lot, or this coming week, next week. There's a lot that has to happen because the parliamentarian still has to scrub the bill because of potential germaneness issues and what's it called, the bird bath, basically. They can't have you basically add and subtract. That's all you could do. You can't do other things in there unless but predominantly has to be adding and subtracting. So you have to do that. They have to corral 50 votes because Sinema hasn't committed to it yet. And because she didn't want to end the carried interest loophole back last year. That was one of her big no thing. She was a no on it. And then Leahy had hip surgery, so he's out. So they might have to wheelchair his ass in to get him to vote. And then Durbin just tested positive for COVID yesterday. He has to isolate for a week. So, and making the palace intrigue even more interesting, the Senate's supposed to go in recess on Friday. They're supposed to end their work. They're supposed to stop work next Friday. They go into recess. So they could stay in extra couple of days if Durbin, clears COVID protocols, and they can wheel Leahy in to vote. And look, Patrick Leahy's an incredibly nice guy. I wish him the best. I've actually met him and talked to him about his role in the Batman movies. He's just an incredibly, incredibly sweet man. But he's going to have to be literally wheeled in on a wheelchair because he's recovering from hip surgery. And he's an octogenarian, But anyway, and you also have to get Cinema, and Cinema has shown an independent streak the size of her state. So, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. And, if there are some things in here that might benefit some Georgians, the Medicare negotiation for prescription drugs will benefit some Georgians because it'll lower drug costs, but it's also going to hurt the production of new cures, new drugs that could come to market. So that's potentially a problem. And then the extension of the ACA subsidies, they're extending those out for 2 more years. They're supposed to expire at the end of the year. That'll help out the people who qualify for the ACA, for exchange subsidies. But in 2 years, your rates are going to go up. And, and that's also part of the problem because they're going to create a cliff where they're going to try to avoid that cliff every so often now. They're just going to try to keep extending and extending and extending. So I don't know. It's pretty interesting. And but the good news is the House is out. They're officially, as of whatever they finished today, they're in recess. So but they will come back in mid-August, most likely, to pass.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That the Senate's changes, so they got to vote on it again. So, wow.
Yeah, and the most that I encourage everyone who's listening, if you're a complete nerd and have no life like me, you enjoy watching the Senate deliberate reconciliation because they have this thing called Votorama, and because it's mandated by the rules of reconciliation, it has to go through Votorama, and it lasts for hours. When they most recently there were 43 amendments that they had to dispense with. They started at 11:30 and did not finish until almost 4 in the morning.
Normally, when you add Orama to the end of something, it implies that it's fun. That does not sound fun. I'm sorry. Votorama sounds horrific.
I enjoy it. No, I enjoy it because it's like you see them debate because each amendment has to get 10 minutes of debate. So they actually sit there and debate and the votes happen and you see who's going to break with their party. And it's really fascinating to watch if anybody breaks with their party. So it's fascinating. It's fascinating to watch because it's the Senate at work and the Senate never works. So
this is history. This may never happen again.
Well, I guess,
I mean, and Votorama's.
I was just going to say, I think when you
go ahead,
you said the name of the bill. So what's the new name of the bill now? Because it's
the Inflation Reduction Act, which Republicans are now calling the Recession Extension.
Yeah, I mean, if you only knew it was that easy just to pass a bill to reduce inflation, then Biden should have pushed for that months ago.
Yeah, and I guess this gives us a segue real fast to do you think we're in a recession,
Yes.
Buzz?
Yeah. Yes.
Scott, do you think we're in a recession?
Who's president of the United States right now? I think that's what
people have been asking that question since the 2020. So,
if Joe Biden's president, then no, we're not in a recession. If anybody else was president, we'd be in a recession.
So it was really funny writing my newsletter on yesterday. I let off that section as say, so if it's a bagel, the Fed thinks it's going to be a mild bagel. And for those of you who don't know, if the uninitiated, that comes from the West Wing because they weren't supposed to say the word recession. They called it a bagel instead. But since we're on the topic, GDP contracted at a rate of 0.9% in the second quarter, which is the second straight quarter of contraction. That is the technical definition of a recession. Yep. The official definition of the official determination of what is and what is not a recession actually comes from the National Bureau of Economic Research's Business Cycle Dating Committee. And so they determine when a recession begins and ends. And a lot of people keep talking about unemployment being low and jobs are being produced. I did include a little note about this in my newsletter for next week, and I'll go ahead and read it for you here. So unemployment is a key indicator of the health of an economy. The unemployment's held steady at 3.6% since March, But a comparable recession could be the 2001 recession, which began in March of that year and lasted for 8 months. GDP contracted by 0.3%. And at the beginning of this recession, the unemployment rate was 4.3% and remained close to that for a few months until began ticking upward. Although the recession officially ended in November 2001, the unemployment rate didn't peak until June of 2003 when it reached 6.3%. It did not fall back below 5% until December of 2005. Now, there were some other events that took place during this time. Obviously, the attacks on September 11th, the beginning of the Afghanistan war and the Iraq war. But my point to all this is unemployment is a lagging indicator of the health of an economy. And just because the unemployment rate may still be low and jobs may be still being produced right now doesn't mean that's going to be the case in a couple months. And especially with other things going on, you're spending more money. So you're going to throw more money into the economy at a time when the economy is already red hot. And the Fed's tightening monetary policy. You had a 75 basis point increase in the interest rates just this past week. And so, the tightening of monetary policy is going to put a squeeze on the economy. And the Fed taking so long to tackle the problem it is a mild, it's technically a recession. It's a mild recession, but the Fed may prolong.
Right. You dump all this money into the economy. I mean, really, we went back to Trump starting this to try to deal with COVID. Biden amped it up and continued it, and took it into hyperdrive. The Fed starts to react to tighten the economy. They're going to overshoot, which brings about a recession, which causes pain. And so, we're in a dangerous spot because it should be a mild recession, but if bad federal policy could make it, and bad policy from the Fed could make it a bad one.
We live in this time where the propaganda of we're not in a recession because of these other factors. I was tongue in cheek. I was being sarcastic. It depends on who the president is, because every other president that's had this happen to them have been labeled as a president that oversaw a recession. And Joe Biden, for whatever reason, is getting a pass from the media. He's getting a pass from the bureaucracy. Why? Why is this happening, Jason? Why are they in the tank for this guy so badly that they can't even use the traditional
midterms are coming up.
definition of words?
The midterms are coming up, and they're trying to mitigate the damage.
Buzz just answered the question. That's exactly what it is.
But every president deals with midterms.
Republicans do the same shit too.
When did Republicans change the definition of the word recession? When? And it's not like Republicans didn't have a recession under Bush.
They called it the Clinton-Gore recession in 2001. That's what it was called. Bush had Clinton and Gore had no control over it. It was the dot-com bubble that burst. Does Bush deserve blame for the 2007-2008 financial collapse? It was a combination of factors, including bad lending practices. But my point is, regardless of which party's in power and regardless of the issue, the party that has control is always going to try to defend its guy. That's why you don't see effective oversight in Congress on anything. Except for when
it's so incredibly widespread. It's not just Democrats out there who are elected saying we're defending our guy. Republicans did that work on their own. The media's bought into the idea. We're not really in a recession. That's what they're saying, and they're
sure.
and every
it's the same. It's this.
Everybody who's on the stump right now, Stacey Abrams is out there saying we're not in a recession. And the AJC is printing her quotes as if they're fact. They're not giving us any type of alternate point of view. It is ridiculous to me that we can't, and I don't care who the party is. I just called out the Walker campaign for using language that I thought wasn't completely accurate. It's ridiculous to me that there's such wide buy-in to this idea that we can't deal with our problems, or that our problems are so scary that we might lose power that we have to redefine words. Right now on Wikipedia, the definition of recession has been locked for further editing, and they've removed the references to 2 consecutive quarters of contraction as the qualifying factor for the definition of the word. It is
this entire.
We're living in an Orwell novel right now. It's ridiculous.
No, it's entirely. And people are looking at job growth and saying, well, job growth is way up, so we shouldn't be in a recession. We're producing 250,000 jobs a month or whatever the statistic is. And I get it. I understand why you're saying that, but like you're talking about job growth that came from what was damn near a depression just 2 years ago. And so, the economy is going to boom for sure. And job growth is going to happen. But here we are, and it should be booming, and nobody, because you're talking about reporters, not economists, and with, at least in terms of the media, and reporters they say, well, 250,000 jobs were produced in June. We can't call this a recession, because most reporters don't understand that job growth or the unemployment rate or unemployment is a lagging indicator. And look, I'm not saying that job growth is going to take a dip. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that we will see how deep this is. But we pay. I think as a society.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think you're already seeing some of the effects of the Fed tightening because the housing market is being impacted. I've talked to some realtors who are freaking out because people that absolutely put the brakes on getting mortgages, because why would you when it's doubled what it was just a couple of months ago? So that's going to have ripple effect. That's going to have ripple effects. And people are going to stop spending, which is part of the intention of the Fed trying to tighten the money supply. But what's that going to do? That's going to hammer retail sales, which is going to impact, which it could impact jobs, which trickles through production, which means it could impact jobs in the production cycle, which impacts the amount of truckers who can. So it absolutely can ripple through the economy, and it can. You're right to caution, Jason. It can absolutely impact the job market.
Yeah, and I think behavior is going to consumers' behavior is going to start to change because, and this is the thing, because at some point if job numbers start to go down, we're gonna start hearing calls for stimulus, and like that's the exact problem that got us into this, or that's exactly how we got into this problem.
They overstimulated. To try to get us out of the COVID lockdown recession.
And I want to be very careful here. I'm not saying jobs are not important, but as a country and as an economy, both the Fed and because the Fed has a mandate to check inflation and maintain full employment. Full employment, I think it's 4.5%. I think is how it's defined or something like that. Mm-hmm. So we focus way too much on jobs. Jobs are not the ends. They are merely the byproduct of a healthy economy. The freer you are, the jobs will come because people will innovate, produce, and things like that. But we focus way too much on consumption, and that's ultimately I think the real problem that we have as an economy is. And I think once consumption starts to contract, once people start to spend less and save more, that's when you're going to see the real freak out. If this does go into a third quarter, I think that's where we can really see where people are going to lose it and start really saying, "Oh, well, no, we are in a recession." Yeah. So we'll see. I mean, but technically, yes, it's a recession. Yes, it's a recession. It's technically a recession. So going back to Georgia, Brian Kemp was in my old stomping grounds. He was down in the HCO, Henry County, McDonough. So he was there to actually focus on Biden's recession. Touting Georgia's economic stats and the fewest Georgians on the unemployment roll since 2001, part of his campaign swing, and then he also announced $125 supply stipends for Georgia teachers. He did that also in Henry County with the Henry County Board of Education. So Kemp is continuing to truck along here, and I don't want to go back into his his campaign. But this is, he's making moves and doing the right stuff.
Yeah, he has to, right? I mean, we talked about the polling data right off the top. We talked about how he's going to have to work hard, and I think these are examples. We talked a little bit about the AJC openly cheerleading for Stacey Abrams. He has to get out there and he has to do these things. He's using federal funds, so let's just be clear about that, for the $125 stipends. So the money's coming from that, but he gets to choose how it's used. The teachers at this time of year are always under financial stress because they're getting back into their classrooms, they're setting everything up. I don't know how far $125 goes. I'm sure it will be appreciated, however much they don't have to come out of their own pockets to buy supplies. So I think what you're seeing Kemp doing is he is just doing what Kemp does, which is keeps, his phraseology is to keep on chopping. He was working hard at making sure people know, because the AJC is certainly not on his side, right? The local media is certainly not on his side. Have we talked about the article? Because Buzz had a great take, I think. And I'm going to steal your point guard here because I think this is a great time for Buzz to tell us about the tweets that Stacey made and the AJC's reaction a couple of days later.
Yeah, it was within days. So Abrams starts tweeting out that she's been, we've talked about it on the podcast. She's throwing out all these policy ideas. Several of them are just copying what Brian Kemp did and then adding, heaping gobs of spending on top of it. And then so she started pointing out, complaining that Kemp doesn't have, Kemp is kind of light on his website, on his policy agenda. Well, because he's running on what he's done over the last 4 years. He's the real governor, not the pretend governor. And within, I don't know many, I didn't count the hours, but it was not very many before the AJC is writing an article about how, what is this? Where are all these things? And taking their lead right from Abrams' tweets. And they did point out that Kemp is apparently going to start putting some stuff on there on spelling out a policy agenda, but he's the incumbent. You don't cast a
right.
He already cast a vision when he ran and when
right.
he won. He doesn't have to.
And how he governed for the last 4 years, right?
Exactly. But I think it just was stunning that, because that was you can draw a straight line from her tweets to an article.
It wasn't just that part being stunning for me, Buzz, because there were 17 days between a tweet that Greg Bluestein made at the AJC and this story coming out, where Greg Bluestein was retweeting the Kemp campaign about how Stacey Abrams' policy ideas were being ripped off from Brian Kemp, that all she was doing was taking Brian Kemp's ideas and adding zeros at the end. And he was actively on Twitter helping to expose that was what was happening. And then all of a sudden, 17 days later, the AJC's writing, well, Kemp's kind of light on policy. No, he's not. No, he's not. And he's not. He just had 4 years, or he's in his fourth year of governing, and the state's in pretty good darn shape. And you have Stacey Abrams telling everybody this is the worst state in the country to live, that her ideas are the best ideas, but they're really Kemp's ideas with a couple of zeros added to the end. And the AJC's out here actively cheerleading. I mean, look, we have the phrase the Alabama cheerleader. Maybe we start referring to the AJC as the Abrams cheerleaders.
Well, yeah, or
maybe.
The Abrams cheerleader, or she was born in Mississippi, right? So she's the Mississippi cheerleader. The AJC's become the Mississippi cheerleader. That was so. Almost my jaw dropped.
So I know we're going to go in here and talk about Shohei Ohtani in a second, but before we do that, I just want to say I went to the congressional baseball game yesterday, and Republicans
Steve
actually
Scalise
won
played, right?
a game.
Yes,
blew him out.
Yeah,
right?
Steve Scalise's. He typically. It was a 10-0 win, and Republicans. I'm trying to find the the record, because Republicans, for them saying they America first, love America, all that stuff, they really sucked at America's game for a while,
man. A bunch of old dudes.
I don't care. I don't care. So just to note. Look, Democrats won between 2009 and between 2009 and 2019, Democrats won every single game except for one. And we're talking blowouts. 2018, I was at that game. Republicans lost that game 21-5. And then they lost 2019 14-7. They won last year. You've won 2 games. If you win next year, that's called a winning streak. They won last year 13-12.
2 is a winning streak.
They won last night 10-0. Not according to Major League. If we, because remember the line of Major League, he's like, we won yesterday, we won today. If we win tomorrow, that's called a winning streak. They also won 22-0 in 2013 as well. Democrats did, but Republicans played well last night, and they could tell they had been practicing. There was a rain delay, like monsoon came down. For those of you who follow me on Instagram, you can go look at my Instagram post from last night because I got the clouds in it. It looked very threatening, but there was about a 45-minute rain delay, and Republicans came out as they started taking the tarp off and were throwing the ball. Democrats were 10-15 minutes behind them before they came out. But I do want to mention here that I am there are a couple All-Stars and an honorable mention. The All-Stars, look, Anthony Gonzalez, who is retiring. He's a former football player, played at Ohio State. Duke can hit a ton, and he had a couple big hits last night. Looked really good. I don't like him, but Greg Stubbe, who was the starting pitcher for the Republicans, pitched a great game.
Say also, you don't like somebody?
Really well.
You don't have to say that.
He votes wrong on all my stuff. He votes wrong on all my stuff. He always, everything I work on, he opposes. So yeah, I'm gonna say it. I don't like how it's not a personal thing. I don't dislike him personally. Let me rephrase. I dislike how he votes. I also don't like how he handles himself on committee because he comes across very arrogant. But he pitched well, and also give a nod to August Pfluger, that is his literal name, politician's name that comes straight out of the 19th century. He was basically the closer for Republicans and pitched. Democrats had bases loaded last night, and I think there was one out. Pfluger came on and shut them down. They didn't score at all, and it was great. He also struck out, which is sad because he had played a great game. John Ossoff, and I got to mention the Georgia connection here. John Ossoff, starting third baseman for the Democrats, had a big hit in the I think first inning. Made a couple he's got a good glove. Made a couple really good plays in the field. Actually cut off the shortstop to get a ground ball. He's got some range. And he was wearing, and we all appreciate this, he was wearing a Fred McGriff jersey.
Yes.
Which, a Braves jersey, which I appreciate. But Pfluger struck him out looking. Pfluger struck him out looking.
Wow.
He looked at that called third strike go right past him. So, but yeah, it was a fun time.
There's no way this guy's going to throw a strike right now.
I mean, some of those guys, Pfluger, Stubbe, Pete Aguilar was the starting pitcher for the Democrats. They were all throwing off-speed stuff, curveballs, stuff like that. But yeah, it was fun. It was a fun game. But so trade deadline's coming up August 2nd, I think, next week.
Yeah.
Braves don't really have a lot to deal in terms of prospects. But there's been not serious rumors that the Braves may make a run at Shohei Ohtani.
There was one guy, right, Buzz?
Would make some sense. He's
I mean, the people started this rumor were Major League, the MLB network, and then they were talking about earlier today that here's who they say Braves that they should do what the Braves should do. They should trade for Ohtani, and they should trade away Kyle Muller, who's doing very well down in Gwinnett, Kyle Wright, Braden Shoemake, who's a shortstop in the minor leagues, and Michael Harris II. I think that's way too much to give up. I'm sorry.
Absolutely,
I love Ohtani. He's an impressive dude, but Kyle Wright is pitching the heck out of the ball, and Michael Harris might be a generational talent. We got to, he's young, but that's too much to give up.
He's a spark plug. Yeah, he's been a spark plug for the Braves this year.
Yeah. I mean, correlation doesn't equal causation, but Braves took off when he came up.
Absolutely.
And Scott's right. He was a spark plug. And, if you trade for Ohtani, you got 2 more years of, you have 1 more year of control because he's, I guess 2 more years of control. He's arbitration eligible. He's signed through this year. He's arbitration eligible next year. He doesn't become a free agent until 24. But, and he's having, an Ohtani season. His numbers on the mound are great. Didn't pitch so well against the Braves. He gave up 6 runs.
Yeah.
Honestly,
I was at that game. He pitched fantastically against the Braves. He ran out of gas in the 7th inning, and they should have pulled him, and they didn't.
They don't have a bullpen.
But those first 6
innings, he pitched great through 6 innings.
Were stellar. I mean, he was his slider was absolutely nasty.
He pitched,
and it was beautiful to watch.
I mean, look, with Adam Duvall out for the rest of the season.
Yeah, he pitched great through 6 innings.
Yeah, with Adam Duvall out for the rest of the season, the Braves need to make a move. They need to bring somebody in to play left field rather. But
it's not just Duvall. I mean, the whole outfield, with the exception of Harris, is playing like crap.
Yeah, Acuna is not.
Acuna is having a down year. Ozuna is terrible.
Yeah.
And
at the moment,
Wilson or William Contreras out there, but he's a catcher by trade. So
yeah, and Rosario's not yet hitting his weight. So it's good to have him back, but he's not yet hitting his weight. So yeah, I mean, it wouldn't shock me if the Braves made a move for an outfielder, but I just think the price that Ohtani is going to command is more than the Braves can pull off.
Especially since they sent a lot of their top prospects to Oakland for Olsen.
Yep.
So I think it was exciting to go and watch Shohei Ohtani pitch. It was, I felt like an obligation as a baseball nerd to go to that game. I way overpaid for some tickets to go see that game because it was sold out by the time I realized he was going to be starting. And it was worth every penny because he was really great for those 6 innings. He wasn't so great at the plate, but he's a generational. I mean, he's once in a millennium player or once in a century player, and I don't think that the Angels will get a return on the value with any trade partners for him. So I don't see him moving. I've read some things about him not being happy where he is because the Angels aren't winning, and they're just not building an excellent team around him. Although the Angels have some pretty good. Taylor Ward out there is a decent player, and Mike Trout can stay healthy.
Yeah,
he wasn't in the game against the Braves, I saw, but they have some good players to build around them, but they just haven't.
Yeah.
So I'll note real fast that the Angels have said that they're not interested in trading Ohtani, but they're still listening.
Right, you always listen, right? I mean, because you never know. Any chance you have to improve your team, you listen. But
well, let me put a name out there that the Braves should probably consider, and that's Brendan Drury, who's currently playing third base, but is a good utility guy, can play outfield, is having a breakout season on a 1-year contract with the Reds. Mm-hmm. I think that would be a good value as a rent-a-player for them heading into the postseason.
Yeah, and
Brandon's probably got a bright future. He has struggled in the past, but he has done yeoman's work for the Reds, playing third base for a team that's just absolutely horrendous, and is one of the bright spots for that team right now. And he's on a 1-year deal, so the Reds have got to move him before the deadline. And I think the Braves could probably pick him up pretty cheap.
And another name that's been floated out there is Ian Happ of the Cubs. I have no idea, but his name's been floated out about as a possible person that's being shopped at the trade deadline that the Braves might look at. So, and of course, Juan Soto's name is floated out there, but I can't see any. Just
you would have to trade the entire Gwinnett Stripers roster for Juan Soto.
Look,
yeah.
He and Will Smith would immediately fight in the clubhouse, so I don't know that he would bringing in Juan Soto would.
I was gonna say, he is without a doubt a good ball player, another generational talent, but I don't like the way he carries himself. And he especially how he's basically carried himself since turning down that deal, which was a 15-year, $440 million deal, which I guess close to a $500 million contract. And look, I get it. You want to move on. I totally understand. Apparently, a lot of the money was deferred and backloaded, and I get it. Maybe it wasn't the best deal for him, but at the same time, like the way he has handled it, it's just been like, you're maybe you need to go out to LA. I mean, or maybe you need to go to San Diego or somewhere like that where you can, because you seem more interested in being a lightning rod than
heard an interesting theory from a guy
on team leader.
One of the MLB reporters talking on the Fan the other day that he might move to Seattle. That the Mariners might put together a package to bring Soto out there, and I mean they're playing some good baseball, and they would certainly be a team that you would think would be buying, and what a jolt that would be to their club to add Juan Soto in there. So.
Yeah, all I know is the Braves got to do something before the trade deadline, because the Mets, don't look like they're going to fall apart.
They picked up an outfielder from the Reds yesterday.
So,
Tyler Naquin is a great corner outfielder. Right. Much better against a right-handed pitching than left. So they'll plug him in up there. They also picked up Vogelbach, who is one of my favorite players just to watch because he kind of built like me. And to see a dude built like me running around baseball fields is always exciting. So,
well, currently the Braves have the third best record in the National League, and looks like the fifth best record in baseball, but they're 3 games back on the Mets. So got to do something. Got to do something soon. So, Anthopolis, if you're listening to this podcast, which we
work your magic, bro.
We're hoping you work your magic, but that's all the time we have this week for the podcast. Scott, do you have
because
our
I don't have
Patreons
access
pulled up?
to Patreon. Oh, no. we have more Patreons than we did last week.
Oh my God! Hold. Please,
in order for me to log into Patreon, I have to get a verification code from Jason. So it's only Jason has access to the Patreon. So he has to log in. I have to log in, and then I have to tell Jason I'm logging in, and he has to tell me what the confirmation code is so I can log in. It's cumbersome. So I don't log in.
We could totally change this. We're changing this over to your name tomorrow. I'm doing that. I'm here. I'm going to be. I have nothing to do tomorrow. I had the busiest day today, even though it's an off day. I had the busiest day today, but I am changing this.
I'm not saying
you bitch about it. So quick. So real fast before I name our Patreons, you can go to patreon.com/Peach Pundit, become one of our Patreons. $5, $10, however much you want to throw at us, just throw at us. Please do. Our Patreons, thank you to Ryan Graham, Hunter Burnett, John Vestal, who is a $10 a month Patreon, Brant Frost, Reed Powell, Benjamin Hurst, and Sam Thomas. Thank you guys so much for your continued support of the Peach Pundit Podcast. Make sure you go to Apple Podcasts or Spotify Podcasts for the Peach Pundit Podcast. You can listen there. You can watch live on YouTube, or not live on YouTube, but you can watch on YouTube. And please also visit peachpundit.com. We've had some really great content this week, including a great post from Laura Hawk. Scarlet Hawk. Sorry, Laura. I don't think it's a secret, but whatever. But thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next week. Peace out. Later.